So warm welcome and good morning to Friday morning. This week has been really an eventful week and we've been covering a lot of topics, obviously with Davos and other areas where we're starting to see some real challenges there and what challenges are ahead and what we're seeing on the marketplace. Um, some of the challenges that we see with our data is quite interesting. So we've just honed in on a couple of things and also a topic that we've been talking about kind of outside of the YouTube channel, because obviously it's new, about BRICS. What is BRICS? And, is there an underlying current there that there's a bit of a power struggle, particularly with the US government, which we've talked about for a long time. We feel that BRICS is probably the biggest challenge to them. And we'll go through some data there or some information that will just keep you in the loop, and we'll keep focusing on this because we see this as big news. It's not talked about. We've been talking about this for the last 2 years. I'm confident that what I'm saying here is we're going to see some real geopolitics and a lot of shifting within trade. And I'll go through why I think that. And again, it's my opinion. It's not gospel. You take the information that you need to take, and hopefully you enjoy. It just gives you a different view because we're not politics. We're not on one side or the other. We just see the news for what it is and then try and analyze the news. So this week's global trade signal, we're seeing the fares a little bit. Excuse me, one sec. It's always the case, and it just as you start having a coughing split, so it gets stuck in your throat. So what we're seeing is the freight rates are easing, capacity removed, buyers hesitant, and managing. I would say the control over the availability. So again, critical data is telling us a few things in the market of what's happening. Container watch major trade lanes. So we've been looking at Asia, Europe, Asia, US West Coast, and Asia, US Coast. So let's have a look at Europe. Rates easy as demand soften, but reliability is falling. Carriers are adjusting schedules. On the West Coast, demand has softened. Obviously, noticeable, yet capacity remains tightly controlled. This is, we call it deliberate management, prevents rate collapse and maintains carrier pricing power. We see that all the time. Rates remain sticky despite broader market trends in the Asia, US East Coast. So again, we had a look at some rates here. Let's have a look. So our data tells us that Asia, Europe coming in around US dollars around 13 to 1600. Weekly direction softening, schedule reliability around 60%. So, and we'll start to look at percentages and everything as we hone in on our kind of rates, because this is really important to understand. If you're doing a lot of cross trade, and what I mean by cross trade, if you're a UK or a US or another or any company in the country you're in, you may be buying goods or you may be having it manufactured in a country like China, India, or somewhere else. So you might be selling that directly to your customer in another country and not bringing it back to the US or the UK, or you might be going straight to that customer. So again, this is where that, volatility and looking at the rates. So that's why we're looking at it. So again, Asia West Coast is, as we've seen there, between $1,700 and $2,100, flat to slightly down, as we said, and tightly controlled. So we're seeing that certainly on the West Coast. On the other side, on the East Coast, rates are slightly higher. And you would expect that, obviously, west, you're coming in, east, you're going on to the other side of the US. So obviously it's a lot further around. So obviously prices are always going to be high. So if you're new to this kind of industry, that's right, it depends on where you are. And obviously West Coast is your first point. East Coast, obviously, you might have to go around, or you're inland trucking. So again, it can be costly. Again, spot rates around $2,400 to $3,000. Weekly directions, we're saying it's a bit sticky. Routing and congestion exposure, that's what we're certainly seeing. We got this from Drury, Freightos, WCI, FBX, Shunko's. So we're looking at the data, what's in there. We have the data, and we're looking at that data mainly for you. Freight is now a strategic lever and not just a cost. So again, look at, if you're in supply chain or need to supply chain, and you're running quite a large operation, these are the things to start looking at. It's very important to start. And if you're smart, it doesn't matter. Get to know your market. Again, this is our container. The weekly globe trade signal, freight rates, is like we've said, have controlled. Again, what data tells us about the economy? That's an interesting one. So again, slides have decided to have a jump around for some strange reason. I have no idea why, but it's fun and games, and I don't pause and do everything else. This is live. It's me. and it's kind of what you have, and hopefully you'll enjoy that more of a human being rather than, all this nonsense with AI, which I'm fully involved in. But there's a certain limit to it. You've got to use AI, the benefit it's used, and that's why we use the data for AI. But human beings is the most important part. So rather than placing large consolidated orders, buyers are fragmenting. So we're seeing smaller quantities, smaller shipments. We call that LCL or groupage. So not a full container load, as you might see FCL. So FCL means full container where you're taking on the full container. A lot more companies are now reducing that, and there's a lot of services out there now for LCL. So, and it's a great way if you think for the environment. We talk a lot about this with the students. If you have two or three pallets and you're booking a full container, which is great because obviously you're keeping control. But actually, if you look at your sustainability and environment, you could be putting that on a very similar service. Obviously, you're mixing with other cargo, but these freight forwarders, these shipping lines are adapt to this. Don't worry that something's going to go missing. As long as you've got all your documents, this is what people do every day. The shipping. So again, look at it. You might be saving yourself a hell of a lot of money, and try it. And this reduces if you can get 10 consignments on a container as opposed to 10 containers. That's got to be better, isn't it? And it's got to be better for capacity. People forget the other things around there. If you're booking 10 containers for the reason that you only put a few bits on there. And I understand why you might want to do that, but just think about it when you're trying to find containers. Because if everybody's doing that, there's a real shortage of containers. That drives prices up. So again, think about it. The more groupage, the more it drives prices down. Again, what we're saying is replenishment. So inventory restocking cycles are extending beyond normal patterns. We're seeing that. And interestingly, we have a holding place in London where we do a lot of distribution for e-commerce, particularly in for things like I don't know, eBay, Amazon. Amazon, if they don't want the stock in Amazon, they pull it out and then they still do the same service, but it comes from one of our warehouses. And we're seeing a tightening there. We're seeing a slowdown slightly there. Long-term contracts are avoided. We're seeing short terms, and I've noticed it within my contracts when I'm doing contracts with people. It's not something I particularly enjoy contracts, but contracts there I'm seeing it. Oh, yeah, and then it's now 3 months, 2 months. There's a lot of uncertainty there. So this is a late cycle trade pattern. Markets don't behave this way during expansion. So again, it's when it's recovery period. So again, just have a look at that and make sure you're aware what's happening. BRICS, who is today? So the original five, as we know. So BRICS is if you think of the EU, 26 member states, and you see other deals around the world, this is very similar. So BRICS was born on the idea of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and that's obviously if you think BRICS, so BRICS. And the idea of that was to start to look at, with all the power changes and everything else, that they wanted a little bit more control. The expansion is going, and there's about 30 countries actually signing up or trying to sign up, and they've got to be approved. We have Saudi Arabia have joined, UAE, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia. So we're seeing some big global players. What does that mean on the global power? We're seeing purchasing power around 30%, world population 40% plus, global trade around 25%. This is no longer, and I keep talking about this, I honestly believe a lot of things that are happening in the US with this aggressiveness is to really get back a hold, because, if BRICS changes and it moves, it's going to affect the dollar. Remember, the dollar after the World War is the currency that's used around the world. That could put pressure on that. That puts pressure on banks. It puts pressure on investment and all other areas. So again, bilateral currency agreements. So the idea of BRICS is that they can deal in their own currencies. So again, it'd be very interesting. Energy, supply chains. You imagine in BRICS that, and I think there was talk of Venezuela and other countries being that. I know he will try and stop that in the US. But you imagine the amount of energy and supply that is available within that section within countries. So there's a real benefit. Again, it's we said BRICS aligned trade corridors, reducing dependence on Western logistics. So there's a shift. We're seeing a shift from west to east, and will that carry on? So again, it's that balance. So again, I think there's a lot of things in Washington. They're very much keeping an eye on this, as much as they're not talking about it. Trade influence moving beyond traditional rules. New frameworks of trade governance, dispute resolution standards set emerge outside the WTO. So normally you sit within the WTO. BRICS will sit aside that, and they'll have their own governing rules within there. So again, that'll be interesting. The idea is they'll allow trade to flow a lot more smoother. if you're in the east side and obviously China are looking, obviously the US, they're being crucified with the US with certain tariffs and everything else, they'll start to look at other options. It's a big old wide world out there. The US has been a huge dominant partner, and we don't obviously want to change that. But there's a lot of challenges there. The UK is a dominant party. It's fifth global, sixth global player. There's challenges there within the UK, and we are sitting in a very unusual position because obviously to join BRICS and other things could probably work for us, but obviously then we're aligned more to the US. Then we're seeing that we're more aligned to the EU. We have to make a stance of what we want to do. And I know it's difficult, and I wouldn't like to be in that position, but sometimes you have to make a stance of what you want to do. The World Economic Forum, Davos, revealed more through what failed to deliver than what actually we expected. So again, a lot of talk. We saw a lot of talk there. Post-average trade environment, trade will be more controlled. What exporters should expect, tightening customs scrutiny. There's a real lead to this, and we can't emphasize enough about your compliance. So again, don't be put off with it. Just understand your compliance, particularly origin. Plays a critical role in trade, and it's very important we understand that. Accurate valuation, if you're doing a lot of cross trade or you're moving goods to sister companies or anything else, transfer pricing. So what do we mean by transfer pricing? That you make sure you're keeping it within a structured price format. So when goods are being sent to another country, you're not reducing that cost to pay lower duties and be more competitive and make more profit. So you've got to be very careful with your valuation. Flexible routing, alternative pathways when primary routes face disruption. So again, how's that going to work? And decision based on signals, not headlines. So, there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of talk at the moment. So, how do you keep up with that? You've got to have a clear strategy. I would say have a clear strategy. We know I'm quite confident what's going to happen in 2026 or where we see and how we can plan that. So again, keep watching the channel. We'll keep you fully up to date on this. It's very important. But yeah, Davos was interesting to me, and I've watched quite a lot of the footage on that. Obviously, it's difficult when you're working and doing lots of things, but I'm trying to kind of snippets, and it's interesting. There's some real power struggles there. There's a real lot of I don't know. It doesn't seem very friendly, does it, at the moment? There seems to be a lot of, is that created by a dominance or trying to have a dominance? I'm not sure. I kept, like I say, I watch it and I watch it with an open mind. I don't watch it and say, oh, he's right or he's wrong. But it's interesting the wording you hear. And I was looking at that recently with Canada, and I'll talk about Canada next week. They're looking now at their trade lane, and their trade lane obviously is a very strong part of the US. And the US at the moment, as you know, and obviously with our friend who was here as our governor of the bank is now in Canada. He's looking at that, and he's strategically now going to China. Who's the winner in this? The winner is China. China will always be the winner. All this silly infighting and everything else what's going on, trying to stop the influence of China. Well, where'd you go? If your trade is not working, you're going to go to the big players. You're going to go to a place like China. China now will get a deal on EV cars going into Canada, probably at lower or zero rates. So where's the advantage there? And then people will go to Canada and buy the cars or however they do it. So, it's a crazy situation. And sometimes we jump into things without looking at the whole supply chain. And I think supply chain is a real critical area, and it's going to be more and more. So let's really delve into that in our next few, especially next week, and we'll start putting a few topics on this. Anybody with any comments and want more topics on this, we can talk about it. I think it's really interesting, and we're going to see a different pattern of how supply chain global trade is going to be coming into 2020, and I think it will set the structure for the future of the next few years. So again, be very challenging. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that, and hopefully see you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for joining us. That's the main thing. You're joining us. Hopefully you're enjoying. Again, subscribe to us. That'd be fantastic. The more you subscribe, the more it shows that people like this. And like I say, have a good weekend. We're back on Monday.